Māori whānau in Pukekohe, who suffered cruel, race-based separatism for decades, say they've waited too long for an apology. The 2020 book No Māori Allowed revealed the depth of the town's sanctioned racial segregation. Now, 3 years on, kaumātua are demanding action from the government. Narurani Pereira, tēnei pūrongo.
It's where more than a quarter of the country's produce is grown. But for decades it was a town that was racially divided. Buried beneath Pukekohe's fertile soil is an ugly chapter in Aotearoa's history.
Very hard to imagine that it actually was in New Zealand.
We want an apology for all the suffering, the abuse, the racial discrimination, the hell we went through.
The town's public cemetery, a stark reminder of its prejudiced past.
These are the unmarked graves of Pepe, our rangatahi, from our community.
They're silent, so I'm going to be their mouthpiece.
To do nothing is not an option.
On the surface, it looks like a mostly empty plot of land, but it's an area Pukekohe Cemetery previously called the Native Section. Buried here are hundreds of young casualties of the racism that once separated this community. Nothing shows the racial segregation that existed between Māori and Pākehā better than at this cemetery. While there's a smattering of Māori whānau buried on this side, the vast majority are crammed into this narrow strip of land, unnamed, unmarked, forgotten.
We weren't allowed to bury there. That was only for the Pākehā, the white people.
The handful of headstones that do exist were put there by whānau in recent years.
At least we can identify where they are so that we could come and spend time with them.
Phyllis Bana was born across the road from Pukekohe Cemetery. Amongst many of her loved ones buried here is Phyllis's one-year-old nephew, George Andrews. Many of these are your own whānau?
Yeah. Majority was through influenza. That's how my nephews died. Probably because of the housing they had back then.
Her whānau are amongst the more than 200 Māori, Pepe and children under 14 who died from preventable illnesses between 1925 and 1962. Whānau from all around the country came to Pukekohe to work as labourers on agricultural land and lived in abject squalor. The unhygienic, cramped, substandard conditions were directly linked to the poor health they suffered. So you've got all the documentation here. Mm-hmm. Phyllis obtained the official council records which clearly mark who is buried in each plot.
This is the area where the 200 plus are buried.
A roll call of names that document a shameful era in New Zealand's history.
These two, that one and that one, they're brother and sister, and they belong to my oldest brother.
While whānau couldn't have afforded headstones, money was paid for the burials.
They had to pay £1 5 shillings to buy a plot to bury them in. But they dug their own holes and they buried their own loved ones. They gave money away for nothing.
What do you want to see there?
A monument for them and their names written down. And just by having their names written down for people to see, that's their voice. They're speaking up.
But the lack of acknowledgement for those who have passed is just part of Phyllis's mamae. Where Pukekohe Hill School stands today is the site of the former Pukekohe Māori school, the only place in the country where tamariki were educated separately, kept away from Pākehā classrooms. It opened in 1952 next to the onion fields where their parents worked. Phyllis started school here in 1956.
I was here from 5 until I was 11.
Today the kura is barely recognisable, but Phyllis has vivid recollections of what happened to her here.
Are there painful memories coming back here?
Yeah, it brings back horrible memories.
When you started school, you only spoke te reo?
Yes.
You weren't allowed to speak te reo, though, at the school?
Not at all. I asked to go to the toilet. Kei te pirangi au te haere ki te wharepaku. And she told me, don't use that dirty language in here. You leave it out the gate. It was a place where they said they were educating us. But why educate us and abuse us at the same time? We got caned, we got strapped.
So you suffered verbal abuse, physical abuse. Was there sexual abuse as well?
Of course it happened. Of course it happened in our school. There's no denying that. At that time, I was 10 years old. I had just lost my mum. Pedal fast. Go!
Phyllis has been a teacher for 41 years. Her dedication to children, her motivation for not remaining silent any longer.
She lived it. She should absolutely be sharing and she should never stop, and we should be supporting her to do that, and we will.
Whānau have put up with decades of loss and trauma, but now Franklin local board member Logan Sewell says they're committed to working with mana whenua to officially acknowledge the unnamed graves.
We have reached out to central government, the minister as well. A letter's come from the mayor.
How important is it for Pukekohe to right the wrongs of the past?
Incredibly important. We can't do nothing. We absolutely cannot do nothing.
Ngā Hau e Whā is an urban marae in Pukekohe built in 1985. Before this, the town's bylaws prohibited Māori from gathering together, which meant no marae were allowed here. This Māori community hall was opened in 1959, the first venue in the area where Māori were free to congregate.
Hard to imagine, isn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't like it was hundreds of years ago. It was just as recent as the 60s, so it wasn't so long ago. We acknowledge and we are so proud and love our kaumatu and kuia that have stood up and spoken out against the atrocities of the past.
Pastor Charles Tuhua is part of Ngā Hau e Whā's Marae Committee, which is in negotiations with the council and government agencies to see how things can be put right.
An apology is a minimum, but also what could a possible future outcome that looks like in terms of reconciliation and healing.
Ngā Hau e Whā wants to see a wharekura built on this empty site next to the marae, what they see as a small step towards healing the intergenerational harm that was caused by degrading and racist laws.
It will give a tangible outcome to those that have fought this battle, who had to endure it over time, but also for their generations, their tamariki mokopuna will be an opportunity for their future.
Now 71, Phyllis gives talks about what happened in Pukekohe, educating others about the past in the hope of restoring the mana for her whānau.
You've been fighting for some kind of remembrance, a plaque or something here for so long.
Oh, absolutely.
What's holding it up?
Politics, the government.
You want to see it in your lifetime?
Absolutely determined. We're going to make sure that these babies will get recognition, even if I have to build it myself.